Okay, is everything ready? I think it might be. Everything over there is turned off. Everything over there is turned on. That's about as ready as it gets. So, let's go ahead and get this started then, right? Hello! Shadowcat back, and today we're going to be talking about a little bit of history. And we're going to talk about a little bit of history just because of what's been happening in the news today. This is going to be one of those cases of those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it, because it is kind of what we're doing right now. And the thing that really spurred this entire conversation on is the fact that I am a terminally online person. Okay, I am online every day, I am online most of the day, and even when I'm not online, I'm still always connected to the internet. I mean, my phone goes with me everywhere. It's always there. As such, I am very much connected with everything that's going on. I do my best to be knowledgeable of current events, of the news, of things like this. But what I want to talk about today is everyone else. Because the subject of today is essentially the normies are waking up. And when I say the normies are waking up, I literally just had a conversation about this yesterday, or was it the day before? Either one. Might have been the day before. Where I told somebody the normies are waking up and they just said, the what? The who? What does that even mean? And I said, you're a normie. Because you had to ask the question. When I said the normies are waking up, when we say normie in general, what we're talking about is normal people. People who have jobs. People who have kids. People who, just live out in a suburb or a small town somewhere, and they go to work in the morning, they come home at night, then maybe they have a hobby, they spend the weekend doing whatever it is that normal people do on the weekend. I mean, I live stream on the weekend, so I already know that I'm not normal. But the normies, okay? The people who do not have the time to really spend following the news, following current events, following politics, following anything international, really. Unless that happens to be like your particular hobby, then you might. But we're talking about normal people. And the reason I want to talk about normal people is because, like I said, the normies are starting to wake up. Now, this has been a long time coming. And it has started it started in the cities, because that's basically where everything has started. It's all started in the cities. And a lot of people were inclined to fall back to their normalcy bias. This idea that nothing is wrong, everything is as it should be, or at least as it normally is. And if you think that there is something wrong right now, then that's probably just your perspective. It's probably your opinion. Things like that. Because things keep on keeping on, like they always do. I mean, presidents come and go. Wars come and go. There's always a crisis on the corner somewhere. But life goes on. I mean, I am 38 years old. Yes, I know, old for a cat. But I am 38 years old. In my lifetime, let's see, I was born the year that both Chernobyl and the Challenger exploded. I was alive during the Bosnian War. I saw the splitting of Czechoslovakia. What else have I seen? I've seen the dot-com bubble and burst. I've seen the housing bubble and burst. I, of course, lived through 9/11. And pretty much the entire War on Terror. Assuming, of course, that it's over. Is the War on Terror over? I mean, we're out of Afghanistan. We pretty much left Iraq in rubble. I don't know. Is the war on terror over yet or not? I can't tell. Anyway, I lived through that. And obviously everything within like the last decade I lived through, and there's way too much to cover there. However, when you really think about this stuff, when you think about all the political unrest, all the social unrest, all of these things, I mean, we all still went to work. We all still had kids. Those kids still had to go to school. Life keeps on keeping on no matter what's going on. Watching Tim Pool, one of the things that he loves to bring up over and over again is that he was in Egypt during their revolution, and he was actually sitting at McDonald's literally 2 blocks away from where a mob in the street was revolting against the military. And he points out that inside the McDonald's, you can get a cheeseburger. People were watching soccer on the TV while there was a revolution going on 2 blocks away. Life goes on. And so it does lead people to having a normalcy bias. Because they say, well, yeah, there might be a war, but if I don't go to work, I'm going to get fired. And besides, is the war going to pay my bills? No, then I still got to take care of that. We have to take care of things on a daily basis, no matter what's going on. It's because of this that... Oh, wait. Before I go any further, I forgot to address the chat. So, chat. Hello, Jeffrey. It's good to see you here. Hello, Blizz. It's good to see you here, too. Jeffrey says, how are ya? And I don't know if that was directed at myself or at Blizz, but just in case it was directed at myself, I'm alright. I'm doing pretty good today. It's a cold and dreary and raining day where I am. Fortunately for me, I don't have to go outside, so that's good. Jeffrey also says, I'm getting people saying that the solar eclipse would bring about the end. What is that about? That is absolutely not part of this conversation, but let me sidetrack into that for a minute. Because it is kind of funny. In case people don't know, and if you don't know, you really should. If you live in the United States, particularly if you live in the central and eastern United States, April 8th, there will be a total solar eclipse coming across the country. This is important because, number one, there are 2 solar eclipses every year. Unfortunately, the Earth is 75% water, or at least the Earth's surface is, which means that generally speaking, solar eclipse, it's usually over the ocean. Usually the Pacific Ocean, but the Atlantic Ocean is pretty big too. So you only have like a 25% chance of being able to see a solar eclipse, a total solar eclipse in the first place. Secondly, as I said, they only happen twice a year. That means that if you live to be 100 years old, there will be a total of 200 solar eclipses in your lifetime. Now, let's assume that you do not have the freedom and autonomy to go chasing solar eclipses until you are 18 years old, the age of majority, and you are now free from your parents, free from everything to go chase them. That's 36 solar eclipses that you've already missed. Then add into the fact that the Earth is 75% water, and that you live in one country of the world. So that leaves like another 23%, 24% of the world that you're not in. The odds of seeing a solar eclipse, a total solar eclipse, are incredibly rare, and you should make an effort to go see the solar eclipse. It could literally be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for you. Where I live, I am actually in the 90% band, and I'm not gonna lie, I am actually a little upset that I will not be able to go the 4 hours it would take me to see the total solar eclipse. And I don't know when it's going to happen again, at least any closer than it is right now. Still though, if you have the chance to do it, if there is any possible way that you can go see the solar eclipse, I would implore you to go do it. You may not get another chance. Now, that being said, the whole thing about the solar eclipse bringing the end, what is that about? Well, the first part of it is superstition. Keep in mind that so long as the Earth has been here, so long as humans have existed, the solar eclipse has held special religious significance. Now, what that significance is depended on, what faith we're talking about. Primarily, I am talking about cultures who actually worshipped the sun. So, daily basis, the sun goes down at night, it comes up in the morning. And we need that, because the sun is what makes our plants grow. The sun is what warms our homes. The sun is what gives us the light to see by. The sun, in case you hadn't realized it, is actually kind of important. So, when the sun just up and vanishes in the middle of the daytime, it is essentially like God saying, "Peace, I'm out." And so primitive peoples got really, really crazy about that. They would pray to the sun for it to come back, they would make offerings, they would sacrifice animals and people to appease the sun and get it to come back and bless them with warmth and light. Because without the sun, we all die. Now, they all obviously had no idea what was going on. We're talking about times before the concept of astronomy even existed. To say nothing of the Earth-centric model of the universe, and way before the heliocentric model, obviously. Still though, this superstitious idea has never left us. And even in modern day, where sun worship has long since gone the way of the dodo, and we now follow a primarily monotheistic, sometimes polytheistic structure of religion, the idea of a solar eclipse still holds a great amount of significance. Then you add into the fact that humans, which is what we are, we have very, very advanced brains. And our brains have been trained since prehistoric times to do a lot of very specific tasks, one of them being pattern recognition. Because we needed to learn how to associate two things. So, again, and I will remind people of this, the rule of threes. You can go 3 minutes without air, you can go 3 hours without shelter, you can go 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. We need all 4 of those things if we are going to survive. Now, the air thing is not as big a deal because we have more air than we need. However, shelter, knowing how to find shelter, knowing where to find shelter, these are things that are important, and we need to learn the layout of an area and the places that look like they will accommodate shelter. I'm talking about not necessarily caves, but that is that's a possibility, But we learn to associate things like if you see a cliff off in the distance, a cliff might actually offer you some decent shelter. You can at least use it as a wall to hopefully block the wind, and you can construct a lean-to or something like that. Large trees, which may offer hollows that you can take shelter in. Things of that nature. You will learn the telltale signs of where to find water. If you can't find a stream or something, if you can find animal tracks, animals need water too. And so we learn to associate tracks with animals, animals with needing water, and if we follow those tracks, we may just find water. Similarly, we need food. And we can follow animal tracks and see what they're eating. If they're eating it, it might be good enough for us to eat. Or we can just eat the animal. So we learn to associate two things together. This is a part of our brain that has been active ever since we were still evolving into Homo sapiens. It remains active today. We will automatically make pairings between two things, two objects, two people, two activities, whatever. It is the reason stereotypes exist. We associate things together. And so, similarly, we associate the eclipse being this weird thing that just happens for no apparent reason, with having to have some kind of reason, some kind of purpose. Even in today when we do not worship the sun. So people always get a little bit weird. Okay, not a little bit weird, a lot bit weird when the eclipse happens. People get a little bit weird when there's a full moon. And there's a full moon every month. And one month, there's two of them. That's called a blue moon. If you didn't know that, now you do. The 1 month out of the year, I'm pretty sure it's only 1 month out of the year where you get two full moons. The second one is called a blue moon, hence once in a blue moon. In other words, maybe once a year. You learned a thing today. See? That's why you come here. So, people are already a little bit weird about the eclipse coming after we just had an eclipse last year. Now, dial into all of this the political, civil, and social unrest that we've had over the last 10 years at this point, which actually is the subject of today's conversation. And people are starting to think that, oh my god, solar eclipse. This has got to be heralding the end of something because everything is going to hell. And, well, they're not right. Everything is still going to hell. And the fact that it's happening now, it is a coincidence, but it is an eerie coincidence. And because people are looking for pattern recognition, they're going to look for signs anywhere they can. For example, if you take the path of the October solar eclipse, and you overlay that with the path of the April solar eclipse, they actually cross paths, which is pretty cool on its own. However, this is another one of those anomalies that people seek to make connections with. And where do they just so happen to be crossing paths? Eagle Pass, Texas, where currently there is a standoff between the Texan National Guard and the Federal National Guard because there are people trying to rush across the border in the millions, invading the United States, and we currently are in turmoil over what are we going to do about this. So people are taking this as a sign. There's also the fact that somebody with way too much time on their hands has been tracking the courses of these solar eclipses, and these solar eclipses seem to be following a line of towns and well, basically it's towns. I don't think any of them are all that big. A whole bunch of towns going through the multiple states, all of them named Nevea. Now, if Nevaeh doesn't really ring a bell with you, let's talk about that. Nevaeh. 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 And what is Nevaeh backwards? Heaven. Heaven. So, we have this solar eclipse is going to be cutting across the country. It's going to be going directly over a whole bunch of cities named Heaven. And the religious people are absolutely losing it, saying that this is a sign that the end is coming, that, Jesus is going to be returning, or I guess if you're Jewish, just coming. And that, things are going to be changing. And so it's bringing all the nut jobs out of the woodwork. And the thing is that we are creatures of habit, we are creatures of patterns, and we are also willing to believe anything that really confirms our biases. So it doesn't really matter what happens during the solar eclipse. Somebody is going to get the exact right portents that they needed to prove that they were right about whatever it is they were saying. So, is it going to be the end of the world? No, it is not going to be the end of the world. And if you are Christian and you were expecting revelations, I would hold off on that. I would not sell all your stocks and bonds and everything yet. Because let's face it, if you're wrong, you'll still have your stocks and bonds and all of your assets. And if you're right, you're going to heaven, and it won't matter anyway. Everyone's stock portfolio in heaven is good. It's heaven. So, we'll just have to wait and see what happens. But, Jeffrey, you were asking about the solar eclipse bringing the end. That's what that's about. But again, I go back to the normies, okay? The normal people who are seeing this, because the eclipse is big news, and a lot of people are going to go out and they're going to see it, especially if it's going over where they happen to live. And there's not a lot of normal people that think the world is going to end, but at the same time, a lot of people are just going to go out, they're going to watch the eclipse, they're not going to think anything more of it. And then after the eclipse passes, they're going to go back to work or back to school or whatever it happens to be. Because they're going to say, huh, that was cool. They're going to shrug their shoulders and they're just going to go on about their day. And that is the topic of today. Because I want to talk about where the U.S. is right now. And for that, I want to go into a little bit of history. And if you've ever listened to me talk about history before, you know that I absolutely hate history. So it's going to be painful for all of us. So I had to rely on Wikipedia for this just because it's the most concise that I could get. And at least they cite their sources. So I want to talk about the Ukrainian-Soviet War. No, this is not talking about the current Ukrainian war. This is Ukrainian-Soviet War, not the Ukrainian-Russia War. So, the Ukrainian-Soviet War, term commonly used in post-Soviet Ukraine for the events taking place between 1917 and 1921, nowadays regarded essentially as a war between the Ukrainian People's Republic and the Bolsheviks, USSR. So the war ensued soon after the October Revolution, when Lenin dispatched Antonov's expeditionary group to Ukraine and southern Russia. There's a lot here that I do not really want to go through because I don't care. I'm not going to lie, I don't care. We'll talk about this briefly. It may be divided into 3 phases. So December 17 through April 18, the Revolutionary Days, attempted Bolshevik coups, invasion of Ukraine by the Red Army formation, signing of the Protectorate Treaty, liberation from the Bolsheviks. December 18 to December 19, civil war in the Ukraine, full-scale invasion by the Red Army, the unification of Ukraine, anti-Soviet peasant uprisings, Denikin's volunteer army, the Allied intervention, loss of West Ukraine to Poland, and spring of 20 through autumn of 21, the Polish-Soviet War, which led to the Treaty of Warsaw, the Russian Civil War between the Bolshevik armies and the armed forces of South Russia, Ukrainian guerrilla operations, the First and Second Winter campaigns, and the government then in exile. Now, I want to talk about this because I want to get into what actually happened. So, December 1917 through 1918. The Bolsheviks, numbering about 30,000 and composed of Russian army regulars stationed at the front, a number of garrisoned units and Red Guard detachments comprised of laborers from Kharkov, Gubernia? I don't speak Russian. And the Donbass, which, if you've been following news, that ought to ring a bell, began by advancing from the northeast, led by Vladimir Antonov Ovsenko and Mikhail Muravyov. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. My best shot, though. Ukrainian forces at the time of the invasion consisted of about 15,000, made up of volunteer detachments and several battalions of the Free Cossacks and the Sikh Riflemen. I'm not sure if Sikh is the right pronunciation for that, because Sikh means something else, and that's S-I-H-K. I don't know. I can't do that right now. The invasion of pro-Soviet forces from Russia was accompanied by uprisings initiated in Ukraine by the local Bolsheviks in the developed cities throughout the city of Left Bank Ukraine as well as Right Bank Ukraine. The Bolsheviks, led by Yevgenia Bosch. If anybody out there actually knows Russian and can tell me how well I'm doing on these, I'd appreciate it because I'm curious now. Conducted a successful uprising in Vinnytsia. Sometime during December 1917, they took charge of the 2nd Guard Corps and moved towards Kyiv to help the Bolsheviks in the city. Pavlo Skoropadsky, with a regiment of the Free Cossacks, and managed to stop them near Zmyrinka. Yeah, I'm not getting that one right. Disarmed them and deport them to Russia. Other Bolshevik forces captured Kharkiv. I am not even going to try those names. Not even going to try. But they captured several of the cities on their way to Kyiv. In January, they converged on Bakhmut and set off under the command of that guy to take Kyiv. There's a lot of history here. The point is that under the Soviet Union, the Bolsheviks basically, there were already Bolsheviks in Ukraine, which is why they were able to stage an uprising like that. And then while they were destabilizing Ukraine from the inside, the Soviet Union marched troops in from the north, and they basically went straight to Kyiv to capture it. After this was done, well, I'm just going to go back up here to the overview. After this was done, they, the Soviet Union controlled Ukraine. And this is just the Ukrainian-Soviet war. This doesn't actually go into a lot of what happened to Ukraine afterwards. But if we come to the aftermath, the end saw the incorporation of most of the territories of Ukraine into the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, USSR, which December 30th, 1922 was one of the founding members of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, also USSR. Parts of Western Ukraine fell under the control of the Second Polish Republic, as laid out in the Peace of Riga. The UNR, led by Seaman Petlura, was forced into exile. For the next few years, Ukrainian nationalists would continue to try and wage a partisan guerrilla war on the Soviets. They were aided by Polish intelligence, However, they were not successful. The last active Ukrainian movements... almost sneezed. Where was I? Yeah, here we go. Would be mostly eradicated during the Holodomor. Further, relative lack of Polish support for the Ukrainian cause would cause a growing resentment on the part of the Ukrainian minority in Poland towards the Polish interwar state. Now, one thing that I do want to bring up is the Holodomor. In case you're unfamiliar with it, and again, I don't blame you, history is kind of boring, but this is actually very important. The Holodomor, also known as the Ukrainian famine, was a man-made famine. And that is important. A man-made famine. It's not caused by the weather or some natural disaster. The USSR did this to Ukraine. It was a man-made famine in Ukraine between 1932 and 1933 that killed millions of Ukrainians. This is one of those things that actually makes the Nazis look tame by comparison. Yes, the Nazis went about and slaughtered just millions of people because that's what they were out to do. I mean, they said that we need to purge the world of the Jew, we need to purge them of the Negro, we need to purge the homosexual, we just need to get rid of all these people. And so they rounded people up into camps, they shot them, they gassed them, whatever. This was even more savage than what the Nazis were doing during World War II. The Holodomor was part of a wider Soviet famine between 1930 and 1933, which affected the major grain-producing areas of the Soviet Union. While scholars are in consensus that the cause of the famine was man-made, whether the Holodomor constitutes genocide remains a dispute. Some historians conclude that the famine was deliberately engineered by Joseph Stalin to eliminate a Ukrainian independence movement. Others suggest the famine was primarily the consequence of rapid Soviet industrialization and collectivization of agriculture. A middle position, held for example by historian Andrea Graziosi, is that the initial cause of the famine was the unintentional byproduct of the process of collectivization, but once it set in, starvation was selectively weaponized, and the famine was instrumentalized and amplified against Ukrainians to punish them for their rejection of the new serfdom and to break their nationalism. Ukraine was one of the largest grain-producing states in the USSR. There is a reason why Ukraine is referred to as the breadbasket of Europe, and was subject to unreasonably high grain quotas compared to the rest of the USSR. This caused Ukraine to be hit particularly hard by the famine. Early estimates of the death toll by scholars and government officials vary greatly. A joint statement by the United Nations signed by 25 countries in 2003, however, declared that 7 to 10 million died. This is just in Ukraine. However, current scholarship estimates range significantly lower, with 3.5 to 5 million victims. The famine's widespread impact on Ukraine persists to this day. Since 2006, the Holodomor has been recognized by Ukraine and 33 other UN nation states, the European Parliament, and 35 of the 50 states of the United States as a genocide against the Ukrainian people carried out by the Soviet government. And honestly, that's all that really matters there. If we're going to all say that it is, then it is. That's how words work. Words have the meanings that we assign to them, which I need to do a lecture on one of these days. It's been on my list for a long time. I'm just not ready for it yet. So, what's important here is, and we may as well go through the history of this because we need to talk about exactly how it was carried out. So, Holodomor, it essentially means death by hunger, killing by starvation, or simply murder by hunger or starvation. But we want to go into the history of it. Because it's not that it happened, it's how it happened that we really need to go into. So the famine affected the Ukrainian Soviet states, or whatever that was, as well as the Moldovan Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic, a part of the Ukrainian SSR at the time, with most victims recorded in the spring of 33. Okay. From the 1932 harvest, Soviet authorities were able to procure only 4.3 million tons of grain, as compared with the 7.2 million tons obtained in the 1931 harvest. Rations in towns were drastically cut back in the winter of 32 to 33 and the spring of 33. People in many urban areas starved. Urban workers were supplied by a rationing system and therefore could occasionally assist their starving relatives in the countryside, but rations were gradually cut. By spring 1933, urban residents also faced starvation. It is estimated that 70 to 80% of all famine deaths during the Holodomor in 8 analyzed oblasts in the Soviet Union occurred in the first 7 months of 1933. The first reports of mass malnutrition and deaths from starvation emerged in 2 urban areas of the city of Uman, reported in January 1933 in Vinnytsia and Kyiv Oblasts. I think that's news, I'm not sure. Mid-January 1933, the reports of mass difficulties with food in urban areas which had been undersupplied through the rationing system, and deaths from starvation among people who were refused rations, according to December 1932. By the beginning of February, according to the reports of the local authorities in the Ukrainian GPU, the secret police there, most affected area was the... Why you gotta do this to me? The Dnipropetrovsk Oblast? Did I get that right? Which also suffered epidemics of typhus and malaria. Odessa and Kyiv Oblast were second and third respectively. By mid-March, most reports of starvation originated from the Kyiv Oblast. I wonder if that's actually obituary. Not sure. So, by mid-1933, the Kharkiv Oblast reaches the top of the most effective list, while Kyiv, that one, Odessa, Vinnytsia, and Donetsk, and the Moldovan SSR were next on the list. Now, what's important, and I wonder if they're going to get into this. Let's see if we can find it. So, causes of the Holodomor, I don't care. Low harvest is obvious. Collectivization, procurements, and the export of grain. We might get into it there. However, I think this is where we want to go. The discrimination and persecution of the Ukrainians. It has been proposed that the Soviet leadership used the human-made famine to attack Ukrainian nationalism, and thus it could fall under the legal definition of genocide. For example, the special and particularly lethal policies were adopted in, and largely limited to, Soviet Ukraine at the end of 1932 and 1933. According to Timothy Snyder, each of them may seem like an anodyne administrative measure, and each of them was certainly presented as such at the time. Yet each had to kill. Other sources discuss the famine in relation to a project of imperialism or colonialism of Ukraine by the Soviet state. According to the Center for Economic Policy Research, let's see. Regions with higher Ukrainian population shares were struck harder with centrally planned policies corresponding to famine, such as increased procurement rate, and Ukrainian populated areas were given lower numbers of tractors, which the paper argues demonstrates that ethnic discrimination across the board was centrally planned, ultimately concluding that 92% of famine deaths in Ukraine, along with 77% of famine deaths in Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus, can be combined by systemic bias against the Ukrainians. But here's the thing. It's not actually talking about what they did. And that's what I wanted. It doesn't actually talk about what they did to the people during the Holodomor. And so, knowing a little bit about the Holodomor, I'm certainly not an expert in the matter, but knowing the little bit that I do know, I want to get into that. So we can talk about policies all day long, we can talk about these things. But what they did to the Ukrainians during the Holodomor is what made it from just a famine, man-made or not, into the genocide that we know it as today. Because what they would do is they weren't just enforcing the famine on people. They weren't just cutting people's rations back and installing, policies and people to enforce them and all that stuff. It was the way they went about it, the attention to detail that they did it in, and the severity with which they did it. There are stories that came out of Ukraine, out of the Holodomor, where Soviet troops would go door to door to inspect houses. They would check your cupboards. They would check every pot that you had, every box that you had, every crate that they had. And they would ensure that you had no grain in the house at all, that you had no grain, that you had no flour. And the way that they would do this is they would open your door, they would come in, you did not have a choice in the matter. You would be removed from the house while they could inspect it. If they found a single grain of wheat, then you could be punished for it. If they found even the dust from flour, you could be punished for it. Not only would anything they found be taken, even if it was a single grain of wheat, but you would be publicly punished as a warning to others. And they were absolutely meticulous about it. They would go through everything that you had, looking for even the smallest sign that you might have food in your home. Because if you can't even send your cut to the Soviet Union, you don't get to eat until the Soviet Union has eaten. As such, that also led to the implementation of weigh stations, where they would bring Ukrainians in and they would weigh them. And if you were not losing weight, then you were guilty of stealing or hoarding food. And this is where the real idea of a genocide comes in, because if you were not losing weight, you were guilty. And if you were losing weight, you were dying. This is one of those black and white situations where it's going to be one or the other. You're either a criminal, and thus you can be punished, up to and including death, or you're starving, and you will die anyway. All roads led to the removal of the Ukrainian people. But it's the way that they went through and did it that was important. It didn't matter if you were a good Ukrainian doing the best you could for the honor and glory of the Soviet Union. The fact is, you were a Ukrainian, and you were going to be punished along with the rest of the Ukrainians. Because that's all that mattered. That is all that mattered. And that's just the one story that I can remember, because it is like one of the worst stories that came out of the Holodomor, as far as I know. Now, granted, they did talk about, where was it? Cannibalism. So, that's great. Survival was a moral as well as a physical struggle. A woman doctor wrote to a friend in June 1933 that she had not yet become a cannibal, but was not sure that I shall not become one by the time my letter reaches you. The good people died first. Those who refused to steal or to prostitute themselves died. Those who gave food to others died. Those who refused to eat corpses died. Those who refused to kill their fellow man died. Parents who resisted cannibalism died before their children did. At least 2,505 people were sentenced for cannibalism in the years 1932 and 1933 in Ukraine, though the actual number of cases was certainly much higher. Again, we go back to what I said, where if you were not losing weight, you were guilty. Which means that supposedly, if you're not losing weight, you could also be branded as a cannibal. It didn't matter what you were doing. If you were not dying, you were guilty of a crime. This is how the Soviet Union treated Soviet Ukrainians. Now, aside from the fact that this is an important part of history that we should never forget, why am I talking about this? I talk about this because this is not an outlier. This is actually the way that many peoples of a conquered territory are treated. I'm sure that anybody who pays even the slightest amount of attention to the news has heard the whole story about how the United States and the American people live on stolen land, okay? That's not true. We don't live on stolen land. We live on conquered land. We came in. There was a previous civilization here. In fact, there were a number of previous civilizations here. And we conquered them. And after we conquered them, well, there were things that we did that may be regrettable. We have actually treated the conquered people of this land exceedingly well compared to what the rest of the world has done. The fact is that we actually stopped the brutalization of the native population in the United States, and for that matter in Canada as well. And we did not wipe them out on purpose. Okay, we said, we've done enough, we have done awful things, it's time that we start trying to make up for that. And whether or not you think that we ever made up for it is really immaterial at this point. You can go back and see my my lecture on reparations if you want to get into that conversation. When it came to the Holodomor, there is not still a Ukrainian people here because they just decided, well, you know, enough's enough. I guess we did enough to the Ukrainian people. No, the reason there are Ukrainian people alive today is because enough of them happened to survive. That's all there is to it. The strongest of them survived. If the Soviet Union could have wiped them all out, I have no doubt that they would have done so. But the reason I get into this is because we have an example here of what it looks like when you have a conquered people and what the conquerors tend to do to them. And I started this entire conversation off by saying that we have to learn history, otherwise we're going to repeat it. I also said that the normies are starting to wake up. How do all of these things come together? This is a story that has been making the rounds, and I'll be honest with you, when I did a quick Google search for this story, it was really hard to find it because Google is trying really, really hard to bury this story. It cannot be buried. Most people know about it, and the more people hear about it, the wider it's going. It's called viral for a reason. But just in case that you have been living under a rock and you have not heard this story yet, I will give you the Cliff Notes version. To make this very simple, the woman that you see here in the picture getting arrested, she had her mother, I think it was, or her parents in general, one of them died. The parent just happened to live in Queens, New York, and so when her mother died, she had a rather expensive house because everything in New York is expensive, and she said, well, I don't need two houses, I'm going to sell this one. So she showed up to clean out the house, prepare it to be sold, get it cleaned up and everything, only to find out that there were a couple of men squatting inside. And when she found that out, she of course called the police. The police came and removed both of them. They first asked the people if they had anything to prove that they, lived there, they had some kind of agreement, some kind of utility, whatever it was. And they said no, so one man was arrested, the other one was simply escorted out. Afterwards, she, the owner of the house now, changed the locks. And by the way, just in case you're interested, this was a major news story. It was actually covered by ABC, I think it was, where they had a full camera crew to capture all of this. After she changed the locks, the camera crew was still there with her when the men came back. They literally kicked in the door, pushed their way past her and her daughter, and made themselves at home again inside. They called the police again. This time when the police came back, the police said, do you have any kind of rental agreement here? I mean, do you lease? Do you rent? What is it? He pulled up on his phone a receipt for something, we're not sure what. But he said, this is a receipt that I have while I was living here. And the police said, that's gonna be good enough. Okay, this is now a civil matter between a landlord and tenant, and you either have to leave him here, or we're gonna take you to jail for wrongful eviction. And given that she'd already changed the locks, and she was going to stand her ground, she said, no, this is my house. These people are invaders. And I will absolutely go to prison over this. And the police, with a smile on their face, said, your wish is my command. They put her in handcuffs, they stuffed her in the back of a car, and they took her away. Now, as it says right here, vigilantes showed up after the property thing went viral. Basically, they showed up, they circled the house, they were knocking on doors, and the men that were inside fled. And I don't know where this stands now. I don't actually know what happened to her afterwards. No one has talked about it. It says here, the report added that Ann DeLauro, I guess that's her name, says she's now being forced to start eviction filing in court to settle the dispute. But I don't know where this stands right now. However, how is this at all relevant? Well, for any normal person looking at this and says, what if that was my house? We have somebody, it's her house. She has the deed for it. Okay, she's paying the utilities on it. She's paying the taxes on it. This is her house in every single conceivable way, except for possession. Because there are two people who just said, empty house. And they broke in and decided to occupy it. The only reason they didn't take it is because it's a house. It's really hard to move. But if this had been anything else, if this had been a car, then they broke into the car and they either just decided to stay in it or they drove away with it. That would be called Grand Theft Auto. If this was anything else, if it was a phone, a laptop, a bag of groceries, anything else, it would simply be called theft. But because it's a house, it's being called squatters' rights, and a lot of people right now are learning that squatters' rights are a thing. And a lot of people are starting to ask, why? Also, I see JP is in the chat now. Hello, JP. JP says, sorry I'm late, had to pick up my new glasses this morning. Did you get me a pair too? Because I need new glasses. Did you bring enough for the entire class? Okay, then I'm afraid you're not going to be able to wear your new glasses this morning. What did you miss? Well, we went on a little bit of a tangent thanks to Jeffrey this morning. We talked about the solar eclipse and the end of the world. But after that, we got into the lecture properly, and we discussed the Soviet-Ukrainian War and the Holodomor. So if you're already familiar with those two things, then great. And if you're not familiar with those two things, I guess rewind or go back to it later. Mostly it was just to talk about the treatment of the Ukrainians after Russia conquered Ukraine. So anyway, back to this. This woman is the lawful owner of the house. She did everything lawful she could, or at least in a normal society, what would be lawful that she could, to take back her house. See, I have to express lawful, because depending on where you go in the country, it would have equally been as lawful to walk into the house, and when you find two people there, to pull out a gun and murder them on the spot. They would be regarded as home invaders. They would be regarded as intruders. They would be regarded as any number of criminal that you want to consider. And the fact that they are inside her house, it would absolutely be well within her right to paint them across the wall. And even if we don't want to talk about state legality, if we go back in time to the frontier era of the United States, if you built a house, okay, if you during the westward expansion, manifest destiny, all that stuff, if you picked out your plot of land, if you built your log cabin on that plot of land and you said, this right here, this is my home now. I am going to live here, I am going to farm here, I am going to make my living here, and when my children are born and I die, I am going to pass it on to my children. If you found somebody else just walked into your house and said, this is mine now, you would kill that person. Because no, it does not belong to them just because they walked into it. And by the way, we're going to get into cases of the opposite happening later. Under any other circumstance, she went the absolute most tamest route by demanding that they leave and simply changing the locks while they were away, before they broke in again. However, since we're on the subject, this is also not the first time this has happened. So this is also from New York, and as far as I know, these people have been captured now. Or at least suspects in the matter have been captured now. They were caught in Pennsylvania. Okay, I guess this must be a really short story. So, multi-state manhunt is on for two squatters who allegedly murdered a Long Island mother in Manhattan. Detectives revealed the man and woman squatted in 52-year-old Nadia Vitel's family apartment. The woman was killed while confronting them inside. Her body was left stuffed in a suitcase. I heard it was a duffel bag. Who knows, though? Maybe it's another state or another case, because these are not rare. The building superintendent showed News Nation affiliate the visible signs of a violent struggle inside the apartment. The superintendent says the woman was found dead in a duffel bag. Okay, this is the same one, and concealed in a closet. They revealed a new twist in the case. The victim was likely killed by a couple may have been squatters illegally living inside the unit. So, much as I just said that, if you were to come home and find somebody else in your house, you can kill them in most states. In this case, this woman came home to find people illegally inside of her apartment, and they just straight up murdered her. Now, of course, then they fled, but given how things are going in New York right now, did they absolutely have to flee? The reason I say that is because I just picked this one up, and I just did a quick Google search for New York subway attacks. And the reason that I stopped here is because there are too many of them. Artist steps in to aid victim in violent New York City attack. 23-year-old woman in connection with a subway attack on a cellist. Subway conductor slashed in the neck in a Brooklyn station. National Guard deployed. And by the way, a lot of these happened after the National Guard was deployed. Subway teen attacks, teen punched, man kicked. Sees man kicked onto platform. There was a woman who was actually pushed in front of the train and had her legs cut off. Yes, right here. All of these things are happening right now, and what is being done about it? We see that the National Guard is not doing anything now that they're down there. They are searching the bags of people who are actually abiding by the law, because people who don't want to be searched just have to jump the turnstile and, go catch their train. I mean, nobody really pays for turnstiles anymore anyway, except for the law-abiding people. The reason that I talk about this is because I want to go back to what we were talking about with the Holodomor, okay? Especially this passage right here, where she says, "The good people died first. Those who refused to steal or prostitute themselves died first. Those who gave food to others died. Those who refused to eat corpses died. Those who refused to kill their fellow man died. Parents who resisted cannibalism died before their children did." What we're seeing now in New York is a reflected facet of what happened during the Holodomor. And I don't want the video playing, so we're just going to go back to this. In New York City right now, we are seeing that if you are a law-abiding citizen, you will be punished. If you try to exercise your Second Amendment rights, you will be arrested for having a firearm. If you try to defend yourself or others, such as the Daniel Penny case, I didn't even bring that up. Hold on, let me pull that up, just because that's actually super important right now. Let me grab that. Daniel Penny case. Let me bring this up. So, lawlessness continues to plague New York City trains as DA Bragg pushes manslaughter charges. Daniel Penny to stand trial in October. I do believe they are in the very first stages of jury selection now. So this is his company. He'll beat the manslaughter charges, but basically they don't feel they can get him on murder. They feel like the best they can get him on is manslaughter, unintentional manslaughter, but manslaughter all the same. But if you look at the interviews and what happened after that, every single person who was interviewed said that he was a hero. Okay? The man that he subdued on the subway train was threatening people. He was mentally unstable. It was not his first time being violent with random strangers. He did what he needed to do when people were in danger. And now he will stand trial for manslaughter charges, and even though he feels that he is confident he will beat the charges, I'm not. I am absolutely not confident that he will beat the charges. I fully believe he will go to prison. And why not? We see that if you try to defend yourself, you will be arrested and imprisoned. If you are a driver in New York City and you're just trying to make a living, what are they doing? They are installing new congestion traffic cameras to charge you more. Of course, you could also just go steal a car, in which case then it won't cost you anything. Every single time we turn around and look at what the good people of New York are doing, every single time, without fail, they're punished. Every time. It doesn't matter what you're doing. If you are a normal person who is just trying to go to work, you will be punished for using your car. You'll be punished for living there in the first place as they continue to increase the rent on a regular basis, pricing you out. They continue to bring in migrants, and they give your resources to the migrants. If you are a struggling family and you need food from, say, the food banks, and I mean, I work at a food bank, so I understand how this goes. But if you are a hungry family who needs it, well, I'm sorry, the food from the food bank has been given to the migrants, who are also here illegally, who are not supposed to be in this country. They are not citizens. They are not residents. They are not even legal. They are criminal aliens who have invaded the country and are now being supported. If you have children and you need your children to go to school because, number one, children need an education, and number two, it's illegal for you to not send your children to school. Yes, they will send the police to your house. They will ask you why your children are not in school. They will then take your children to school, and they will take you to jail. Unless, of course, they need shelter for the migrants, in which case they'll start putting beds in your local school, and they can say, well, you can just educate your children from home. It doesn't matter if remote learning is only a fraction as effective as in-person learning. Every single time the good people of New York turn around, they are punished for trying to live a normal U.S. citizen's life. And why is that? This is why I say that normies are starting to wake up. It's also why I titled this live stream The Conquered States of America. Because when we look at things that are happening in New York, when we look at things that are happening in Chicago, or not Chicago, but Illinois as a whole, and I say Illinois as a whole because we all know that Chicago is a shithole, okay? We know that Chicago is corrupt. We know that Chicago is lawless. We know that Chicago has been this way for over a century. There is a reason why Chicago has the history it does. It goes all the way back to the mafia days and the early teens and 20s of the 20th century. But this is also happening in California, particularly in Southern California. Northern California still kind of has the stuff together. But it's happening in Oregon, particularly in the northwest part of Oregon and Portland. It's happening in Washington, particularly in northwest Washington around the Seattle-Tacoma area and along the western coast, because nobody lives anywhere else in Washington but the western coast. I don't blame them. It's a lot of trees and a mountain that might explode. I'm talking about Mount Rainier. Mount St. Helens already exploded, but Mount Rainier? Ooh, Mount Rainier could go any day. Don't listen to the volcanologist. Trust me, that thing's a time bomb. Anyway, though, we see this happening all over the place, and the people who are suffering because of it are the normal, everyday Americans. And this is why, in a previous live stream that I did, where I really asked the question, and I really did ask the question, do we have sympathy for people's own actions? Because we've had the conversation before, and we've asked the question, if these people who live in the cities do not get out, and then they suffer from the city because they did not get out, should we have sympathy for them? After all, these are just normal people trying to live normal lives. But at the same time, that's a bit like saying, yes, the garage is on fire, but I mean, I don't even need to go into the garage because I got like 3 days off. So I don't need to go into the garage. I don't need my car. I'm just going to sit here and watch football. Do you have sympathy for people who are the victims of their own actions? Or do you just fully indulge in schadenfreude? Now, we talked about that before, and most of us agreed, at least on this channel, that we don't have a whole lot of sympathy for people who are victims of their own actions. Do we think it's right? Well, no, it's not right. But at the same time, you've been warned. And we've been warning. People all over the place have been warning for a long time now that you need to get out of these cities or states that are going down this direction. One of the things that Tim Pool loves to talk about is he loves the time travel test, and I agree with him. I think the time travel test is absolutely great. If you're not familiar with it, let me make it very short. The time travel test is this. Hindsight being 2020, of course. Go back 10 years in time. Okay? Let's say that you're in New York. Go back 10 years in time. So we're going from 2024 back to 2014. And what was happening in 2014? Let me pull something up. Let's see. 2014. U.S. major events. 2014. Major things that happened in the U.S. in 2014. Let's see. Events in 2014. That's right. Obama was president. Let's see. The following laws go into effect. I don't care about those laws. Oh, here we go. Events. Wait, no, that's not what I want. Is this all like election stuff? I don't care about this. Births, deaths. This is not what I want. Let's see. Big news stories in 2014. Let's see. Ebola outbreak in Western Africa. The Russian annexation of Crimea. Well, isn't that topical? Let's see. The emergency of the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria dominated the headlines. That's everything in the world, though. Let's see. ABC News? What's this? Let's see. The Ebola epidemic becomes a global health crisis. Disasters in Malaysian airlines. Oh, is that when that one Malaysian jet disappeared? Fighting in Ukraine and Crimea. The deadly Israel-Hamas conflict. Oh, that was the last time they fought. That's right, I forgot about that one. The rise of the brutal new terrorist group. The world shows its competitive side in Sochi and Rio. Oh, that's right, it's an even-numbered year, so it would have been the Olympics. Summer Olympics? No, Winter Olympics in Sochi. And the World Cup in Brazil. Republicans take control of the Senate in the midterms. Comedy loses legends Robin Williams and Joan Rivers. The funny thing is that after all the plastic surgery, she actually still looks the same today. Let's see. Fatal use of force by police in America. Oh, that was after Ferguson. That was the Michael Brown thing. Remember, hands up, don't shoot? Yeah, remember that was pretty effectively debunked after they found out that, yeah, he was actually fighting with police and had a long history of fighting with police. And a robot makes the first ever comet landing. Sony hack ruled an international attack. Cuba? President Obama made a landmark announcement declaring that the U.S. would begin restoring diplomatic relations with Cuba by reopening the embassy in Havana. Well, that's great. Trudeau's father should be pleased. Okay, and that's it. So, that's 2014. Do you remember 2014 now? Okay, now that you got a better picture of 2014, what if I told you that in 10 years, there would be a woman in New York arrested for trying to remove invaders from her own home? That National Guard would be patrolling the subways in New York due to the crime problem. That there would be daily murders on the New York subways even with the National Guard there. That citizens who try to help out are going to start being arrested. That more people are going to be homeless. That the population of New York is going to increase by double-digit percents as they begin to take in illegal criminal aliens. If I told you all of this back in 2014, would you actually believe any of it? Or better yet, if you were to tell, say, your neighbors or your co-workers or Susie, who takes her kid to soccer practice every Wednesday, would any of them believe this either? The answer to that, of course, is no. Most people are busy. They have other things to do. But unfortunately, that's where we are now. I brought all this up because the treatment that we see of people in New York, and this doesn't just apply to New York, this also applies to Chicago, Illinois, it applies to Dalton, Illinois, it applies to pretty much all of Southern California, everywhere that we discussed already. The treatment of the people there is eerily similar to what we saw during the Holodomor, where people would be punished if they found a single grain of wheat in their house. People would be punished if they were not losing weight. People would be punished if they were not praising the Soviet Union or praising Marxism, where you would be punished for basically anything, and the only people who were actually going to get by and survive were those who were crafty enough to avoid being found by the Soviet soldiers, those who were strong enough to do whatever it took to either steal food or to resort to cannibalism. Only those people who were willing to do whatever it took, whether it was legal or not, and especially if it wasn't legal, only those people would survive. And only those people would be safe. Because, for that matter, keep in mind that there was also a great deal of corruption in the Soviet Union. And I pulled this up. I was going to go through it, but there is kind of... Okay, there's actually not a lot here. Never mind. Let's see. So it happened at all levels and positions of power, including political corruption in the early years. They did have an investigative committee accused of bribery and blackmailing. In 1918, the decree on bribery was signed by Lenin, which punished both givers and takers, but we all know that that didn't do anything. With Brezhnev and afterwards, corruption at the highest levels had grown considerably during Brezhnev's tenure. It had become a major problem in the Soviet Union's economic development by the 1980s. When Andropov came to power, he initiated a nationwide anti-corruption campaign. Not that that matters. So we had Vasil, I'm not even going to try that name, the Soviet fish mafia, Soviet fur mafia, the Uzbek cotton scandal. And this is not even what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is just the general corruption that you would see on a daily basis, where you would have to you would have to pay essentially the Soviet soldiers that were in your local area, or the local officers, or the police, or whatever, just to go about your daily life. So when we're talking about things like Ukraine, all I'm saying is that, like, sure, the soldiers that are in Ukraine are fed a whole lot better than the Ukrainians were, but like, if you wanted to get away with, say, just living, you might have to steal food, and maybe you give a little bit of that food to the local soldiers to look the other way. Or you start predating on other people, your neighbors. But as long as you pay off the right people, you can get away with it. Now, what we have in New York is they don't even have to pay people off, because they just let them go again. The reason I bring this up, and the reason I called this stream the Conquered State of America, most people who do follow politics will agree that we are a bifurcated country. It's not just that we have different opinions on how things should be done. It's not like we're discussing, should we be raising taxes or lowering taxes? Should we raise interest rates, lower interest rates? We are an entirely divided country. The Venn diagram of politics in the US is now two completely separate circles. Okay? You are either one or you are the other. It's basically Bloods and Crips on a political level, with the only difference being that, actually, believe it or not, the Bloods and the Crips are more tolerant of each other currently than conservatives and progressives are. I mean, when it comes to the Bloods and the Crips, they can at least do business together. They don't like each other, and they will continue to have gang warfare between them. But they can at least do business together, because they all want money. At the point that we're at right now, even when it comes to the conservatives and liberals, they don't even care about the money at this point. It is completely ideological. And so that leaves everybody in the middle, who used to be in that overlap area, to choose. Because you have one of two options. You either choose a side, or you can be brutalized by both of them. Which is what we've seen in other conquered territories before. The liberals, the progressives, the leftists, they have taken New York. Okay? The state of New York now exists at their whim. They control everything. They have the governorship. They have the mayor, the mayoral seats. They have the justice system. They have the education system. They have the communication system. They're in the police, they're in the fire, they're in the medical, they are in everything. The left controls every single facet of your life in New York. Especially in New York City, but even if you get out of New York City, it doesn't really get any better there. They control everything. And so where does that leave you if you happen to be not even conservative, but just a middle of the road, trying to get by U.S. citizen, where you grew up in school learning about the Constitution, you say, well, I am an American citizen. I have First Amendment rights. I have Second Amendment rights. I have Third Amendment rights. I have Fourth Amendment rights, so on and so forth. If you are just a typical normal person who took civics in high school and learned about the Constitution, you are under the rule of people who don't believe you have rights at all. And Jeffrey says, it's bad when gangs can work together and you and your friend can't agree on who should win. That's true. That is absolutely true, because right now we are seeing the divide in politics in the U.S. split families. Which, as we've discussed in previous streams, the family is the most important thing in society. If you can't even have families, you cannot have communities. You cannot have towns. You cannot have society. And they have managed to pretty firmly use politics to destroy the family unit, among other things. Trust me, there is a multi-pronged assault on what the family is. And if you want to talk about that in a future stream, we can do that, but we're not going to get into that right now. The point is, though, that if you are a normal person living in New York, you are a conquered people. Every single normal, law-abiding person in New York is now subject to the whims of the state. The state that has decided that they are not going to hold criminals. They're going to have no cash bail. But if you break the law, such as Penny did, okay? If you use force of any kind and then decide to turn yourself in, well, you're the one that's going to be in trouble. Another thing that Tim Pool likes to bring up a lot is the Proud Boys. I think it was the Proud Boys. Maybe it was somebody else. I'm pretty sure it was the Proud Boys, though. When they were at an event, and Antifa was there to protest, Antifa started throwing things at them. They engaged in mutual combat. So Antifa went after them, they went after Antifa. It was a big fight between the Proud Boys and Antifa. Afterwards, when the cops showed up, Antifa said, "Get out of here." They fled in all different directions. The Proud Boys said, "We were attacked." And the police, again with a smile on their face, said, "Okay, you're all under arrest." And now the Proud Boys, after being attacked at their own event, are all in prison. Because if you cooperate, if you do what they want you to do, if you follow the laws, you will be punished. Just as it said here, the good people died first. Those who refused to steal or prostitute themselves died. If you follow the laws, if you follow the rules, they will punish you. Why? Because they can. And also because if you are one of those people who will follow the laws, if you're one of those people who believes in things like constitutional rights, that is a signifier that you are the enemy. All of these criminals that they are letting out, these are their people. All of the criminal aliens that they keep importing, these are their people. These criminal aliens are criminal aliens in the United States. But they are absolutely citizens of the new Democrat order that is being installed in these places. That is why every time they get there, they are being given housing, they're being given food, they're being given money, they're being given protection, and they're being given rights. In places like New York, in places like LA and San Francisco, they are giving them the right to vote. First in local elections, then in state elections, and soon, probably for this year actually, they will be allowed to vote in federal elections. They are being given all the rights and privileges that are supposed to be reserved for citizens. But that's just it. They are citizens. They are citizens of that state. They are citizens of those cities. And those states are essentially sovereign nations. We have seen this in the past when it came to sanctuary cities in the first place. Federal law. This is federal law. This is in the Library of Congress or wherever it is they keep all the federal laws. Federal law determines who is and is not a citizen and how you must enter the country. You have to come through a port or a border checkpoint. You have to be able to identify yourself, your reason for being, and then you're allowed to enter. And if you want to become a citizen, we have a process for that. To do anything other than that means that you are not allowed to be here. You are here illegally. You are an alien. You have committed a crime. But these states are not following federal law. We see this with the sanctuary states when it comes to immigration. We also saw this when it came to Roe v. Wade, where states said we don't actually abide or agree with the restrictions provided by Roe v. Wade, and we're going to ignore those entirely. Which actually made it kind of funny when Roe v. Wade was overturned and it was sent back to the states, where states that were already incredibly liberal and progressive cried about Roe v. Wade being overturned, even though it actually just legalized them, or it gave them the legality to do whatever they wanted with it. Before, they had been breaking the law. Now, they were not breaking the law, but they were still angry about it because it had been overturned. Which means that they didn't actually care about it, they cared about the appearance of it, and all they really wanted was to have complete control over the federal law process. But that's a different conversation. We've seen this on display when it comes to the Second Amendment, where pretty much every single state is violating the Second Amendment. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That doesn't mean shall not be infringed by the federal government, but the state government? You can do whatever you want with it. No. Shall not be infringed. But they all do it anyway. The point is, these blue states have essentially stated in everything but direct name that they are now sovereign nations outside of the United States. And they can't do that because if they were to do so, then they would run the risk of losing their precious federal dollars, and most of these blue states could not function without that. There are some that could. California could, for a while. California does grow an incredible amount of food, and they have the largest coastline, so they can do business. However, without the money from the government, they would probably end up just going broke and their entire system falling apart. Point being, though, that all these blue states are already acting like they are a different sovereign nation. They are essentially the new Confederate States of America. All of them do march in lockstep. They all agree with each other. They all share information. They all share resources. They are a new confederacy inside the United States. They've taken over. And that means that anybody living inside of those states who is not a part of the new regime is a conquered people. And as I said before at the very beginning of this, the normies are starting to realize it. With the case of the woman getting arrested in her own home, more and more people are starting to realize that that could be me. Many people are also realizing, as, cities or towns decide that they want to try the migrant thing, they're realizing that, hold on, because I didn't vote in the last, local election, my school is being turned into a migrant shelter. And now my children have to go back to remote learning. Which is like super inconvenient for me because I have to go to work. Except that when I do go to work, I have to, I have to go see the DEI person tomorrow. HR has called me in to have a meeting with them and the new DEI administrator because I apparently said something wrong. So now I gotta worry about if I even have a job after tomorrow. Not that it matters though, because after my last paycheck, I paid rent, I paid electric, I paid water, I paid sewer. But after I got done paying all my bills, I didn't have enough money to go to the store. I have to wait till my next paycheck before I can go grocery shopping. What's going on? The normies are starting to wake up. I have said it for a long time, and I will continue to say it for a long time. The vast, vast majority of people do not care. They don't pay attention. They don't care about paying attention. They don't care what's going on until it gets to them. This is just a normal fact of life for being human. Paying attention requires effort. You have to make the effort if you're going to keep up with everything that's going on in the news. And believe me, I know. Whenever I'm doing editing, whenever I'm working on a project, I always have the news on because I'm doing my best to keep up with everything going on right now. And especially in the modern era, where we have ubiquitous communication, there is so much information to go through that it is a full-time job trying to keep up with it. I do not fault people entirely for saying, I have a job, I have kids, I don't have time for this. But that's also akin to saying, you don't have time to change the oil in your car. Okay? It is true. You have a job. I get it. You work a minimum of 40 hours. Unless you work 12s, then maybe you work a minimum of 60 hours. Maybe you pick up extra shifts. Maybe you have a second job. Maybe you're working upwards of 80 or 90 hours a week. I get it. Maybe you have kids that you have to take to and from school. You got to make sure that they have something to eat. You have to take care of after school activities. I understand that people are busy. But if you're too busy to change the oil in your car, eventually your engine locks up. And then what would have been a $10 trip to the oil change place is now going to be what is it for a new engine? $7,000? A $7,000 fix? I don't know how much an engine costs. I mean, yes, you have maybe a leaky pipe in your house, and you just can't find the time to go get it, or to fix it. Because you gotta open up the wall, you have to change fittings, it's a lot of work. So you're not gonna get to it. That's fine. Except because you left it go for so long, now your floor joists are rotted. Now you gotta do even more work to fix those. And yes, JP, I said a $10 oil change. How much is an oil change nowadays? I don't drive. I have not driven since I lived in Texas. But I think back then it was like $15 at the local Valvoline place. Again, that was like a decade ago though, so I could be off. Anyway though, the point is, if you don't take care of these little things ahead of time, they are going to change, or they're going to be a bigger problem later. And the same thing is true when it comes to politics. Most people, the vast, vast majority of people, completely ignore their own local politics. They don't care about their local town, village, borough, whatever. Who cares? And JP says $50 to $75. You are shitting me. There is absolutely no way somebody is charging $75 for an oil change. If they are, they better be pouring liquid gold in there. There's no way. I think the most expensive I paid was like $35. And I never went back to that place either. Anyway, though, most people ignore their local elections because who cares? And you know what? I'm guilty of this one too, okay? Let's put all the cards on the table. All of them. Okay? I'm going to play my hand completely open face. I only just recently learned who my mayor is. Okay? And the reason I learned who my mayor is because I told you I work at a food pantry, and guess what? He works at the food pantry too. I had been working with him for weeks before I realized he's the mayor. He also happens to be not just the mayor, but he's also our local police officer for the township. Which I realized that, you know, maybe that's giving away too much information, but the fact is, I didn't know. Because I didn't pay enough attention to my local stuff. I paid a lot of attention to the national stuff, like most people tend to do. I paid some attention to my state stuff. Nothing to the local. But unfortunately, that's what we need to do. So you need to pay attention to your local elections and all that. And then, yes, your state elections. You need to know who your governor is. You need to know who your district attorneys are. You need to know who your federal judges or your state Supreme Court judges are. Who your legislative representative is. Because remember, every state mimics the federal government. The federal government has a president, a Congress, and a judiciary. Every state also has a governor, a Supreme Court, or if you're in New York, the Superior Court, because they got everything backwards. Just more proof that New York screws up everything. Every state also has a legislature. And you have a state representative who represents your particular district in your state legislature. You need to know who those people are and what they're doing. And then, after you've taken care of all of that, you can worry about the federal government. But that takes time. Unfortunately, though, you don't have a choice. You don't have a choice in keeping track of what's going on in your local area any more than you have a choice between changing your oil and fixing a leaky pipe. It has to be done. And if you don't do it, you will suffer the consequences of your own inaction. And that's what a lot of people are facing right now. I was discussing this with somebody else earlier, and I think we're done with all these things, so I'm going to get rid of these. I was discussing this with somebody earlier, and they said, you know, maybe it's time for people to get out of places like New York, and I said, maybe. Can you? Because think about this. Lots of people have been saying it is time to leave these cities a long time ago. Half of the reason why I started doing all of these lectures is because I kind of want to be able to say I told you so. All right? I am not a good person. I will absolutely tell you I told you so right to your face. Okay? And I'm not necessarily going to be happy doing it, but I will still do it. People have been warning that the cities are going downhill fast. And that sooner or later, if you do not get out of the cities, you may not be able to. In the case of, say, New York City, especially where they're getting their new congestion cameras in place, and they're starting to restrict where you can go with your car and when you can go with your car, can you even get out now? Or is there a chance that they may just start saying, you know what, we're going to be turning off certain streets, so we're going to be blocking these off just because we want to reduce traffic. And all they got to do is just block off enough of those and say, look, now nobody can leave. Think of it as like Escape from New York, except they don't really need a big wall. All they need to do is just block the roads out of there, and the good people, the people who won't ram their car through a barrier, the people who won't try to sneak out some other way because that would be wrong, yeah, they're all going to be locked in anyway. They won't need a wall to keep them in. They will keep themselves in. JP says, Shadowcat's tombstone. See? I told you. Yeah, pretty much. Because it's also coming to a lot of people online's attention that, you know what? We have been talking about this for a long time. We have been trying to shed light on the situation. And as the left wins, as they capture more institutions, as they conquer more territory, sooner or later, they are going to come for the dissidents. I am a dissident. I am not shy about that, and I don't need to be. My body of work, small as it is so far, speaks for itself. I know what I've gotten myself into. And as I was explaining to somebody the other day, everything on the internet is forever. You have one of two choices. Number one, you moderate yourself, you hide who you are, or you own it. I have said a lot of very inflammatory things online. I have said a lot of very cruel things online. And every single time I have done so with full knowledge of what I am doing, full belief in what I am saying, and justification for why I am saying it. A good example of that is when it comes to things like the Native Americans. I have heard all the stories about stolen land in the United States. I have heard that we need to be, removing white people from their lands and giving it back to the individual tribes who were previously there. I've heard all the stories of the white people practicing genocide and everything else. And my opinion of that was, and always will be, if you're not happy with the way things are, we could finish the job. Which is a very cruel statement to say. And a lot of people would instantly recoil from that and say, how could you say such a thing? But the fact of the matter is that when you look at history and you look at what happens to most conquered people, they are either completely executed and eradicated from the territory, down to the last man, woman, and child, or they are fully integrated into the new society, which is to say that their culture is outlawed. So no more books, no more art, no more celebrations, no more anything. All of that is now verboten. You will live as your conquerors do, you will breed with your conquerors, and you will mix the bloodlines until your people no longer exist. Or the third option, which is just removal, where we're not going to execute you, we're not going to integrate you, but you have to leave. We don't care where you go, but you can't stay here. This is our territory now. And you're gone. In the case of the US, with the Native Americans, did we do a lot of bad things to them? We absolutely did. And then afterwards, when we looked back at what we did, we said, you know what? We may have gone a little bit too far with some of that. So here's what we're going to do. We understand that you are the native populations here. We are going to give you your land, okay? Maybe it's your ancestral land, maybe it's just land that we had available, but we're going to give you this large swath of land, and you are going to be a sovereign enclave within our nation. Is it the best solution? No, not really. But then again, that also depends on who you ask. Is it the best solution? Probably, all things considered. Is it the best solution from the Native Americans' perspective? No, of course not. They want everything back. They're basically Inigo Montoya from the Princess Bride. It says, "Hello, my name is Algonquin. You killed my fathers. Now prepare to die." But guess what? They can't do that. It doesn't matter. They could wage an entire war against the U.S. They're not going to win. They're not getting the entirety of their ancestral homes back, and we can't bring people back from the dead. Yet. I'm sure that somebody out there is working on that. So even though it's not perfect, this is the best we can do. And the fact is that if that's not good enough, there are alternatives. And you're not going to like those anymore. It's one of my most controversial takes, but it's one that I do believe bears at least discussion. Because as we talked about in the video on reparations, there are some things that you just cannot make up for. And so the only thing left is to simply accept it and move on, or you can simply remain bitter and hateful forever, and then you can die bitter and hateful and having accomplished nothing except for bitterness and hatred. Bitterness and hatred don't build things. Which unfortunately is kind of what we see when we look at the Native American reservations today. And I'm sorry about that. I wish we could fix it, but you cannot force a people to live the way you want them to. We did the best we could. And that's all we can really do. It's also the case that we're seeing in a lot of other places around the country right now, where we see people who are living in these cities, and it's like, we have warned you about what is going to happen to you. You can get out now, or you can try to grab what you can and run with whatever you can carry on your back. Is it a good thing? No. And do we deserve to help them when they do flee from these cities? Maybe. We technically do not owe them anything. Especially when you consider the fact that we have warned people that this was coming for a long time. And what do we do about these cities that are captured, that are conquered? Do we try to take them back? Because now you're basically talking about war. Is it worth going to war with a completely sovereign state that has already been conquered? Do you form a resistance? I don't know. At this point, I can't really recommend anything because I don't know what we should be doing. The only thing that I can say right now, as the normies are waking up, as all of this is becoming more mainstream, as more landlords are arrested, as more people are being killed by migrants, as more people are going to jail for simply trying to live their life and exercise their rights, it is your job. It is your job to know what is going on, to participate in your local town, to vote in your local elections, to be knowledgeable. Is it an inconvenience? It is absolutely an inconvenience. Guess what? You're an adult. Being an adult is a life of inconvenience. Do you think that children are convenient? No, children are not convenient. Children are like the farthest thing from convenient. but they're important. Is having a job convenient? Absolutely not. Do you have any idea how many things I'd rather be doing right now? No. But it's important. The important things in life are not convenient, but that's why they're important. You need to take care of them. And I think a lot more people are starting to realize that. And the real silver lining here, okay? The real white pill in this entire pile of black pills. And I know that I am handing out black pills like Skittles. The white pill in all of this is that the people are waking up and they are realizing that we have to handle it here. And so while New York may be lost, Illinois is lost, Michigan is lost. I mean, Michigan is a lost cause. California, Oregon, Washington, the entire west coast of the country is lost. I would just as soon put up a wall across all of it and write all of it off. Just pretend it doesn't even exist anymore. Don't give it any more time, don't give it any more money, don't give it any more resources, and just cut off the cancer. Even though all of them are lost, we are seeing a whole lot more places that are waking up and saying, we're not going to be like that. We are going to take things back. We're not going to take those back, okay? They're gone. But we're going to start enshrining the fact that you can't do that here. And we're seeing that because a lot of places are starting to put forth propositions to become like sanctuary states or sanctuary cities. And the people are now showing up in power. They're showing up in force, saying, absolutely not. We've seen what has happened in other places. When they declare themselves to be a sanctuary city, we will not do it here. Is it enough? No. But it's a start. There is something big coming this year. What it is going to change the entire course of all Western civilization. And I hate that the U.S. has that kind of influence, but it does. What happens this year is going to change everything. So make sure you take care of your own, take care of your family, your community. That's your responsibility. It's my responsibility. So it's time to be responsible. Anyway, that's where I'm going to end this for today. JP said, All Things Considered was a popular show. Your lectures remind me of it. I'm not familiar with it, but that's because I don't watch a whole lot of TV. I actually attend a virtual club on a weekly basis where they play movies, and it's kind of funny because when they discuss what movies they're going to be doing the next month, people will start throwing out movie titles, and I'm just kind of like, I haven't seen that one. I haven't seen that one either. I haven't seen that one either. I haven't seen that one. How do you people see so many movies? I just recently saw the movie Ready Player One. Apparently it came out 6 years ago. Good movie, though. That's really fun. But I mean, I don't see a whole lot of TV shows or movies. I usually have to try and make time for it. And even then, it doesn't always work. So, I'm going to get out of here. I hope I've managed to make some kind of point with this lecture. I know it got a little bit rambly at times. It got a little bit diverted at times. But I hope that I'm at least able to send you home with something. Unless you're already home, in which case, I hope you took something away from it. As for next week, I don't know what's going on next week. It's just basically going to be whatever inspires me at the time. If you're here for the tabletop streams, tomorrow we finally get to move into the firearms for the Eldar, which shouldn't be too long, I don't think. So we may actually make some significant progress there. We'll work on it. So I hope to see you for the the tabletop stream tomorrow. If not, I will see you for the next lecture next Saturday, hopefully. Unless I take a day off. I could probably use a day off someday. Oh well, not today anyway. So I will see you eventually at some point. Otherwise, just check out the other videos on the channel or join us in the Discord. The Discord is fun. It's not as active as it could be, but there's always fun things that pop up there sometimes. So, make sure you subscribe to the channel if you want to get any of that stuff. Make sure you hit the bell icon so anytime I put something out, you get notified of it, whether you want it or not. If you know somebody else who also follows the news and they're kind of curious as to how we got here and what's going on, share this video with them because this will give them a lot of insight. Otherwise though, if you like me, you like what I'm doing, leave a like in the video. If you want to leave a comment, you can do it either here in chat, here in the comments, or on the Discord. And I will see you next time. Until then, take care.